Black History Month. Why don't they teach about the Arab Muslim slave trade in Africa? That's pretty obvious. You see, blacks want you to believe that they're somehow special in their victimhood. That's why whenever anybody else brings up the fact that just about every other race on the planet, if not all of them, at one point in time was a slave, whenever that happens, they get upset. They get butthurt. Well, that's not the same thing. That's totally different. We're not talking about Jews. Yeah. By the way, that whole bullshit about Jews having been slaves of the Egyptians didn't happen. Did not fucking happen. Just some fairy tale bullshit. Like the entire Bible. But anyway, before I get into this story, I'd like to ask those of you out there who like and appreciate my content to please consider going and checking out my website, therealistphilosopher.com. That is therealistphilosopher.com. You'll find a lot of useful and interesting links in the upper right-hand corner, which is the menu. You'll find my Twitter, my Facebook, my Gab, my Instagram. I suggest you follow me on all of those because you never know when I might change platforms, when I might be streaming or producing content somewhere else, and this way you will never lose track of where I am. So follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, follow me on Gab. Also follow me on BitChute, which is where all my content eventually ends up. BitChute.com/TheRealistPhilosopher. That is BitChute.com/TheRealistPhilosopher. And if you really want to support my work, the best way you can do so is by making a donation. There's 3 ways you can do so. At the bottom of my website, number 1 is my Bitcoin wallet address. Number 2 is my Cash App. And number 3 is my Patreon, which is a per-piece platform. I make about 8 pieces a month. So if you donate $1, it's $8 a month, 50 cents, $4 a month. I think you get the idea. Whatever amount you donate, it's completely entirely up to you. So go check that out, realistphilosopher.com. That is therealistphilosopher.com. I could really use your help. Okay, so Black History Month. By the way, why is there Black History Month but no White History Month? I mean, didn't we build the entire modern world almost single-handedly? It's almost as if the less you accomplish in history, the more you need your own month. It's almost as if they're saying how awesome Whitey is by not giving him his own month. Well, why, people accomplished so much you couldn't fit it in a month. Yeah, they don't really need their own month. They've done so much, accomplished so much. It's all around you, the reminders of everything that Whitey has done. Only black people need their own month because, we need to make them feel like they've contributed somehow too, even though there's nothing around to tell them that, because what did they invent? What did they create? What did they innovate? Nothing. Nothing. No race on earth has done more to create the modern world than Whitey, which is why he's so hated, because everybody resents him. Yes, so Black History Month. Why don't they teach about the Arab Muslim slave trade in Africa? Yeah, why not? So the story begins, as for America's annual Black History Month, actor Morgan Freeman spoke for many during his 2005 exchange with CBS's Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. Wallace said, Black History Month, you find, Freeman replies, ridiculous. Wallace responds, why? Freeman replies, you're going to relegate my history to a month? Well, let's be honest. There isn't that much to black history. You slaughtered each other for countless centuries, millennia. You didn't even have the wheel until we came along. You still can't even build your own fucking airplanes. I remember seeing one video where a bunch of black people tried to build an airplane in Africa and it didn't work. They had blueprints and everything. They couldn't get it to work. Yeah, I think we can relegate your history to a month. But anyway, you're going to relegate my history to a month, says Freeman. Wallace says, come on. Yeah. Freeman says, what do you do with your history? Which month is White History Month? Come on, tell me. Wallace says, I'm Jewish. That's a big shocker. Freeman says, okay, which month is Jewish History Month? Wallace replies, there isn't one. Freeman says, why not? Do you want one? Wallace says, no. Yeah. So black people, oh, they've been so impoverished, they've been so oppressed, they've been so put upon, they've been such victims that they need their own history month to make them feel special. Freeman, I don't want one either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history. I mean, you're a part of that history, but you were pretty much just a ride along, weren't you? You weren't driving the fucking car. Nor were you building the car or inventing the fucking car. Wallace replies, how are you going to get rid of racism until Freeman replies, stop talking about it. Yeah, stop talking about it. But they don't want you to stop talking about it, because if you stop talking about it, then it might go away. And one of their most useful tools would disappear. One of their most useful tools for dividing and conquering America would go bye-bye. I'm going to stop calling you a white man, and I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. Yeah. Isn't that what the left's all about? In fact, they tell you you're not allowed to be blind to race. They've actually made it into a racist talking point. They turned it into a qualifier for being racist. If you say, well, I don't see color, that makes you even more racist. How is that? Well, we don't want you to not see color. We don't want you to be not racist, or somebody that we could label not racist, so we're going to label not being racist as being racist. Yeah, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman. You're not going to say, I know this white guy named Mike Wallace. Hear what I'm saying? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Despite years of Black History Februaries, many know little to nothing about the vast role played by Arab and Muslim slavers in the African slave trade. The practice began centuries before European slavers bought and transported slaves out of Africa and continued well after European slavery ended. Yeah, but you see, the reason for that is because black people want to present Whitey as the ultimate evil bad guy in history. If it comes out that, there was actually somebody worse involved in the slave trade, and they were just offering a product that Whitey bought, oh, well, uh-oh. They don't want you to know that Whitey was just as big a victim. In fact, more of a victim than black American slaves at that time. They don't want you to see that. Well, wait a second. If Whitey is the ultimate bad guy, if he's the Dr. Evil of the transcontinental slave trade, then how can he be also a victim of it? Wait a second. The practice began centuries before European slavers bought and transported slaves out of Africa and continued well after European slavery ended. Yeah. What people don't know is that after the creation of America, during a 20, 30-year window, 2 to 3 million Americans were abducted into slavery. 2 to 3 million white Americans were abducted into slavery and had to be ransomed. At one point, it was so bad that 25% of America's GDP was being spent to ransom white abducted Americans back from the Ottomans, who at that time ruled the seas apparently and were abducting white Americans willy-nilly. But wait a second, how could Whitey be the Dr. Evil of slavery in regards to black people in America and also a victim of it? Because there was a bigger, badder dude on the block, the Muslims. Oh, but Muslims don't have any shit we can get them guilted into giving us. Muslims are too poor. I guarantee you if Muslims were the richest motherfuckers on the planet and not Whitey, they'd be guilting Muslims into giving them reparations. But since that's not the case, well, we'll blame Whitey. Muslims got nothing to steal. Not that you could guilt them into anything anyway. So Temple University professor Mark Lamont Hill, for example, teaches media studies and urban education. He once tweeted, I support reparations 100%. Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. They want to get reparations. They want to get free money, okay? And who has the money that they can guilt into giving up? Whitey. Yeah. When the NFL offered its players a 2017 trip to Israel to give them a better understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Hill encouraged the players not to go. Of course, because people conflate Jews with Whitey, and they look like Whitey. And if Jews have suffered horrible slavery, which they did during World War II at the very least, and are doing so well in the world, well, that might make black people question why they're doing so poorly if it was slavery that is somehow holding them back. Yeah. about an open letter signed by several prominent blacks in the entertainment industry and others known for their involvement in social justice. Hill wrote, "The letter drew on the undeniable connections between the struggles faced by black and brown communities in the U.S. and Palestinian, Afro-Palestinian, Eritrean, and Sudanese communities in Israel and Palestine." Did the struggles to which Hill referred have anything to do with Arab and Muslim slavers? Another aspect of this is the Muslims are one aspect of the intersectional pie that is attacking and deconstructing Western society. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay? The feminists, the fags, the homos, the global homo agenda, all the anarchists and fascists and commies in America. Well, the Muslims are their allies in destroying the decadent, evil, whitey, imperialist, colonialist West. So they ignore these factors, right? Yeah, it was the Muslim slavers really that were the big baddie, that were the Dr. Evil of slavery in the 18th and 19th century. But they're our allies now. They're helping us deconstruct evil, decadent, colonialist, whitey countries. So we'll ignore their wrongdoings. We need to shift their wrongdoings onto whitey. If we reveal the truth, most people who are ignorant of history will have less reason to hate whitey, who we hate. Oh, man. So during February, students K through 12 are, of course, taught about slavery. But as with Hill, what many teachers seem not to emphasize is that slavery is as ancient as humankind, and that it was practiced nearly everywhere. Economist Thomas Sowell writes, more whites were bought as slaves to North Africa than blacks brought as slaves to the United States or to the 13 colonies from which it was formed. White slaves were still being bought and sold in the Ottoman Empire decades after blacks were freed in the United States, another factor they don't want you to know about. This includes the huge role played by Arab Muslim slavers. So here's one of the more important aspects of the whole slave trade that they don't want you to know about. That's why they totally, completely ignore the Muslim slavers. In addition to the reasons I already quoted, is because they don't want you to know that so many whites were slaves. And that even after being slaves, they achieved greatness. You see, it goes against their whole identity politics narrative that the depredation and poverty that blacks, especially in America, that they suffer today is linked to slavery. That it's somehow inherited. Because if Whitey, who was also a slave, didn't inherit it, well, then that challenges and blows apart their whole narrative of inherited poverty. Well, my great-great-great-great-Grammy was a slave, and your great-great-great-great-Grammy, oh, your great-great-great-great-Grammy was also a slave, and you're doing well, and I'm doing shitty? Oh, I can no longer use that as an excuse for why I'm doing poorly. It might be because I made bad decisions. Oh, no. Can't think about that. No. As to the Arab-Muslim slave trade, Ghana professor, so professor in Ghana, and Minister John Azumah helped set the record straight in the legacy of Arab Islam in Africa. In an interview about his book, Azumah said the following: while 2 out of every 3 slaves shipped from the Atlantic were men, the proportions were reversed in the Islamic slave trade. 2 women for every man were enslaved by the Muslims. They had to have their sex toys. They had to have their sex dolls. They had to have their concubines. They had to have their harems packed with women. While the mortality rate of the slaves. By the way, I find it very interesting that people who talk about Southern slave owners talk so much about how those evil, horrible Southern slave owners would rape their female slaves and all these mulattoes running around because of that. The Muslims did this much more so, and in greater numbers. We don't want to talk about that. They're our useful idiot allies against you, evil whitey, who we hate because you're so wealthy, so we resent you, like all communists. We would hate the Muslims as much if they had anything to envy, but, they're all a bunch of poor, broke motherfuckers. So while the mortality rate of the slaves being transported across the Atlantic was as high as 10%, the percentage of slaves dying in transit in the trans-Saharan and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90%. Let me repeat that. While the mortality rate of slaves being transported across the Atlantic, meaning from Africa from Muslim countries to America was 10%. The trans-Saharan and East African slave market was a staggering 80 to 90% mortality. Wow. But Whitey's the evil one. While almost all the slaves shipped across the Atlantic were for agricultural work, most of the slaves destined for the Muslim Middle East were for sexual exploitation as concubines in harems and for military service. I called it. Of course, I know my history, so. Oh, yeah. That's crazy. So out of all the slaves shipped to other Muslim countries, so Muslim countries from Africa, 80 to 90% died in transit. Wow. So the Muslims really killed a lot more black people than Whitey. Oh, but Whitey's the bad one. And by the way, didn't we buy our slaves from the Muslims? And black people? Wasn't it black people, in fact, that were enslaving their own people and then selling them to the Muslims? While many children were born to slaves in the Americas, the millions of their descendants are citizens in Brazil and the United States today, where they have a pretty good fucking life, too. They should count themselves lucky they're not in Ghana or Zimbabwe or South Africa. Very few descendants of the slaves who ended up in the Middle East survived. Well, yeah. They didn't want those kids being born. Abomination! Whack! Lop its head off after it's born. Kill it in the womb before it is born. While most slaves who went to the Americas could marry and have families, most of the male slaves destined for the Middle East were castrated. And most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. So you have to look at things contextually. You have to look at them within the context of the given situation. Yeah? Slaves in America were slaves, but they were treated a hell of a lot better than they were treated in Muslim countries. A hell of a lot better. So the Muslims had way more slaves. They were the ones who were involved fundamentally in the trade and sale of slaves. So why aren't they the big evil baddie? Nobody envies them. They have no wealth. They're all poor people eating dirt. Yeah. So while most slaves who went to the Americas could marry, most of the male slaves in the Middle East were castrated, and most of the children born to the women were killed at birth. See, I called it abominations. Yeah, they were abominations. No half Arab, half black babies here, off with its head. It's estimated that possibly as many as 11 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, 95% of which went to South and Central America, mainly to Portuguese, Spanish, and French possessions. Only 5% of the slaves ended up in what we call the United States today. 5% of 11 million. 5% of 11 million. However, a minimum of, get this, 28 million Africans were enslaved in the Muslim Middle East. I'm going to repeat that. 11 million were transported to South and Central America. Only 5% of those ended up in America. 11 million. Meanwhile, 28 million were sent to the Muslim Middle East. Since at least 80% of those captured by the Muslim slave traders were calculated to have died before reaching the slave markets, it is believed that the death toll from 1,400 years of Arab and Muslim slave raids into Africa could have been as high as 112 million. 112 million. Very interesting. Oh, boy. Geez, seeing these numbers, you would think that the people who would be castigated the most for slavery and all the harm that they did to Blackie throughout history would be the Muslims, because they did the most by a factor of 10, by a factor of 100. No. But they don't have anything useful that we want to steal. Mr. Freeman is right. Black history is American history. It ought not be relegated to a month, and slavery ought not be relegated to only the European slave trade. Yeah. Many of those Europeans, by the way, were slaves themselves. The truth about slavery includes the long, extensive, and deadly role played by Arab and Muslim slavers. Yeah, but you see, if you tell the truth about slavery in its entirety, then there's nothing special about black people. Nothing special at all. Every race out there at one point in time has been enslaved. And now for the final point that I would like to address, and that is the left's argument that slavery built America and created the wealth that we have today and now benefit from. Me, Whitey, apparently. blacks aren't benefiting at all, even though they get a hell of a lot more welfare than their representation in the general population you would think would merit. But there is this argument. One of their main arguments for reparations is that, well, you know, America was built by slaves. Slavery built America, even though there's northern states that never at any time had slavery. The North didn't have slavery. The South was completely, totally bankrupted by their war with the North. And after the Civil War was over, the only wealth they did have, which was the slaves, which they had all their wealth invested in, got up and walked away. And to this very day, many southern states are still suffering from that loss of wealth, which was in the trillions of dollars in 19th century money. But hey, slaves built America and created its wealth. This is one of the main reasons that the left doesn't want to talk about, doesn't want you to know about, doesn't want you to think about the Muslim slave trade. For you see, Muslims today are broke-ass mofos. They got nothing. They're broke-ass mofos. And of course the left would argue, well, all those wars with the West in the 20th century, early 21st century bankrupted them. No, they were shitholes even before that. They were shitholes even before that. But why? Why? You see, the left says that the West's wealth was built on slavery. But if that's true, why is it that the nations on earth, the Middle Eastern nations, the Middle Eastern countries that had the longest history of slavery and the most slaves by far than any other nations on earth, and nations that to this day still have slavery, Libya is one good example, why is it that they're so broke? Where's their wealth? Where's their wealth if slavery leads to prosperity? How does that jive with the biggest slavers on earth, by far, being broke as mofos, even though they still practice slavery? Well, it totally destroys their narrative that America's wealth was built on slavery, which it wasn't. And by the way, they also don't want you to look at that some of their most stalwart allies in the fight against so-called Western decadence and evil capitalism are still at this very moment practicing slavery of blacks, castrating blacks. These are things they don't want you to see. They don't want you to question their narrative. They only want you to think and know the things that serve their agenda. And if you were to take a closer look at the Muslim slave trade, you would see that after 1,400 years of trading slaves in the tens of millions, hell, over 100 million, what do they have to show for it? They broke. They broke-ass mofos. Well, there goes the whole argument for slavery creating wealth and America being wealthy only because of slaves, who we argue built the wealth of America. But the biggest slavers on earth are broke-ass motherfuckers. So anyhow, let me know what you think of this article in the comments section. And please like and subscribe to my BitChute channel if you have not already. bit.ly/The Realist Philosopher. That's bitchute.com/The Realist Philosopher. And again, if you really like and appreciate the raw, red pill nature of the content I create, maybe you'll consider making a donation supporting my work by going to my website, TheRealistPhilosopher.com, scrolling down to the bottom of the page and choosing a donation option. That's TheRealistPhilosopher.com. Could really use your help.